The hall was enormous, built of shining black stone and glowing silver lines that ran across the walls like veins of light. Alien banners hung from the high ceiling, each symbol showing pride and power. Rows of diplomats, warriors, and nobles filled the long seats that stretched around the circular chamber. Their eyes, sharp and alien, followed every movement of the human who stood calmly at the center. The aliens whispered among themselves. Some hissed. Some sneered. They had expected weapons, documents, or negotiations. Instead, the human carried nothing but a small, square black object in his hand. His calm smile disturbed them more than any threat would have. The human placed the strange device on the table before him. The alien commander narrowed his glowing eyes. "What is this?" he asked, his voice echoing through the chamber. The human did not answer immediately. He simply tapped the object, and a soft glow came from it. The aliens leaned back in unease. Every alien instinct told them this was dangerous. Their kind feared strange things, especially those that gave no warning of purpose. Some reached for their weapons. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, ready to leap into action. But the human raised one hand in peace, his smile steady. "This," he said, "is part of our culture, something you have never heard before." The aliens looked at one another in confusion. A culture? They expected some grand speech or a display of human weakness, not a small device. The chamber fell silent, a silence so heavy it felt like pressure on their ears. They waited. The human pressed a button. At first, there was nothing. Then a sound began, low and deep, like a distant storm rolling over mountains. The walls vibrated slightly. The alien stiffened, claws tapping against the stone tables. The sound grew louder, sharper, filled with strange metallic growls and thunderous beats. The air itself seemed to shake. The aliens' sensitive ears twitched painfully, but they could not look away. The noise was unlike anything in their world. The first screeching guitar note cut through the silence like a blade. Several aliens jumped from their seats, their spines arching in alarm. A diplomat cried out, "What weapon is this?" Another covered his ears and hissed in pain. The steady pounding of drums followed, heavy and fast, each beat like a hammer smashing into the floor. The ground trembled beneath their clawed feet. Their hearts raced in fear. For them, music was soft, calm, slow. Never this madness, never this violence. This was not sound to them. It was an attack. Yet the human only nodded his head slowly, in rhythm, his face showing no fear. The alien commander slammed his fist on the table. "Stop this!" he roared. "You'll destroy the hall!" But the human did not stop. Instead, he leaned closer to the device, turning the sound even louder. The voices in the music screamed now, wild and harsh, as if 1,000 warriors shouted together. The aliens panicked. Some fell to the ground, clawing at their ears. Others backed away, bumping into the walls. Guards rushed into the chamber, weapons ready, thinking an enemy attack had begun. But there was no attack, only the strange box releasing endless chaos. The guards froze, unable to understand why their bodies trembled at mere sound. The human stood tall, letting the storm of noise fill the chamber. His lips moved slightly, almost singing along to the violent rhythm. The aliens could not believe it. How could a fragile human stand unharmed in this storm that felt like claws tearing through their skulls? Some shouted orders. Some begged for silence. Others simply watched in stunned horror, unsure if this was madness or genius. Their glowing eyes darted between the device and the human, who acted as if this chaos was normal. One elder diplomat whispered with trembling lips, "This cannot be art. This is war. This is destruction." The younger aliens, however, felt something different. Beneath the fear, their blood rushed faster. Their hearts thumped against their ribs in time with the drums. They had never experienced such a thing. Their entire lives had been filled with strict order, silent halls, and calm songs meant to keep them under control. Now, for the first time, they felt wild. They felt free. One young alien clenched his fists, his claws scraping the table as if he wanted to strike in rhythm. Another's tail lashed against the floor uncontrollably. They were terrified, but deep inside, something else grew, something dangerous. The sound rose higher, more violent, every note shaking their bones. Some aliens collapsed, unable to handle the pressure. Others stood frozen, torn between fear and fascination. The commander shouted again, but his voice was drowned out by the thunder of the music. Even he, strong and proud, felt his chest beat harder, his vision sharpen, his blood boil with strange energy. He clenched his jaw, refusing to show weakness, but his claws trembled against the stone table. The hall was no longer silent. It was alive, roaring with the storm of human heavy metal. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the human pressed the device and the sound stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. The aliens stood in shock, gasping, some still covering their ears. The commander's breathing was heavy, though he tried to hide it. The younger ones stared at the human with wide eyes, their bodies still trembling with leftover energy. The human smiled calmly again, as if nothing had happened. "This," he said softly, his voice almost lost in the echo of silence, "is music. This is heavy metal." Every alien in the chamber stared at him as if he had just shown them a forbidden weapon. Some looked at him with hatred, some with fear. But a few could not hide the fire that had awakened inside them. For them, silence would never feel the same again. The sound filled every corner of the ship. It did not stay trapped inside the council hall. It spread through the walls, through the metal floor, through the air vents like an invading force. The heavy beat rattled the lights, the sharp guitar notes scratched against the nerves of every alien ear, and the screams shook their chests. Outside the chamber, guards stopped in their tracks. They had been patrolling quietly, but now their weapons shook in their hands. The vibration made their skin crawl. Some thought the humans had planted a hidden bomb. Others believed a strange new weapon had been unleashed. They rushed toward the hall, panic rising in their throats. Inside, chaos grew worse. The diplomats shouted over each other, their voices breaking with fear. One alien female clawed at the table, her scales scraping sparks from the polished stone as she cried out for the sound to end. Another collapsed against the wall, his body twitching as if the music was lightning moving through his veins. "Shut it down," they begged. "It is killing us!" But the human envoy stood calmly at the center, his arms crossed, his eyes glowing with amusement. He tilted his head to the rhythm, tapping his foot as if the storm of sound was nothing more than a pleasant song. His lack of fear enraged the commander even more. "Stop this madness," the commander roared, his voice swallowed by the thunder of drums. He tried to step closer to the human, but his knees shook under the pressure of the sound. Every step felt like walking against a hurricane. He shouted again, but his words were drowned by a furious scream from the device. The alien soldiers burst through the doors, their weapons raised, expecting to see invaders. Instead, they saw a single small black box glowing on the table, spilling noise like a volcano spilling fire. They looked to their commander, waiting for orders, but the commander himself was struggling to stay upright. The human turned the device louder. The music swelled, filling their bodies with vibration so strong they could feel it in their bones. The guitars roared, the drums pounded like a war march. The growling voices inside the song sounded like armies screaming into battle. Some soldiers dropped their weapons, clutching their ears and crying out in pain. Others tried to fight the sound, shouting war cries of their own, but their voices were weak against the hurricane of noise. They shouted until their throats tore, but the sound of heavy metal crushed every attempt, drowning them in chaos. The human laughed, a deep and satisfied laugh that chilled the aliens' hearts. The elders in the chamber believed they were witnessing an attack unlike any other. To them, no weapon was needed if this sound could break the strongest warriors without spilling a single drop of blood. One of the oldest diplomats whispered, "They have found a way to destroy us without war. They will make us tear ourselves apart." Fear grew stronger among the higher ranks, but beneath that fear, something else stirred in the younger aliens. The sound stabbed their ears, yes, but it also woke something deep inside. Their hearts raced faster than they ever had before. They clenched their fists, their claws tapped against the table, their tails lashed wildly. Their instincts told them this was dangerous, but their blood told them it was thrilling. One young alien warrior, unable to resist, let out a wild scream. It was not a scream of fear, but of release, as though the music gave him permission to let his soul roar freely. His voice joined the storm, and for a moment he felt alive in a way he had never known. The aliens around him stared in horror, thinking he had gone insane, but the human noticed. His smile grew. "Do you feel it?" He shouted over the music. "Do you feel the fire?" The young warrior roared louder, beating his chest to the rhythm of the drums, his body shaking with energy he could not control. More aliens began to tremble, caught between terror and curiosity. Their bodies moved without their permission. One alien female, a noble princess, found her claws tapping against the table in rhythm with the pounding drums. When she realized, she yanked her hand back, horrified at her own betrayal of discipline. But her heart still raced to the beat. Another young soldier stamped his foot without meaning to. He stopped instantly, eyes wide, as though someone had seen him commit a crime. The elders barked at them to resist, to cover their ears, to stay in control. But the music was too strong, too wild, too alive to ignore. The commander tried once more to silence the madness. He staggered toward the table, his claws reaching for the device. The moment his hand neared it, a new riff exploded from the box, faster, sharper, heavier than before. The commander's hand froze midair as if struck by invisible force. His body shook violently, every bone vibrating. His vision blurred, his teeth ground together, and his chest pounded with strange power. He pulled his hand back, trembling, unable to continue. The human watched him and said nothing, only nodding to the rhythm with a smile that burned like fire in the commander's pride. All across the hall, the noise turned panic into chaos. Some aliens screamed at the human to stop, others cried out for guards, but some had started to sway. They hated themselves for it, yet their bodies betrayed them. They wanted more. The drums pulled their hearts like a chain. The roaring voices filled their blood with heat. They did not understand it, but they could not deny it. They were terrified that a mere sound could change them so completely. And still, they could not look away. The human finally raised his hand and pressed the device. The music cut off in an instant. Silence crashed down like a heavy stone. The aliens gasped for air, panting, as if they had just run through fire. Their bodies shook. Sweat dripped from their skin. The hall was filled with the sound of their ragged breathing. The human looked around slowly, meeting every pair of terrified eyes. "This," he said calmly, "is called heavy metal. To us, it is art." The aliens could not answer. Some were furious, some broken, some trembling with secret hunger. But none of them would ever forget the storm of sound that had just torn through their world. While the hall still shook with silence after the storm of sound, one figure did not tremble like the others. He was a tall alien soldier, scars running down his arms, his armor marked with battles that had nearly killed him. Unlike the diplomats and nobles, he was not raised to fear noise or chaos. His life had been fire and war, and what he had just heard stirred something deep inside his chest. While others gasped and pressed their hands against their ears, he kept his gaze fixed on the human. His jaw tightened, and slowly, very slowly, his head began to move in rhythm, replaying the echo of the drums inside his skull. The others noticed. Their eyes widened in shock. A diplomat hissed at him, "Have you gone mad? That sound is poison!" But the soldier only narrowed his eyes, his body still, his heartbeat rising with the memory of the music. He did not feel poison. He felt fire. His claws tapped against the table, not out of pain, but in rhythm. The elders saw it and recoiled in fear. "He is infected," one cried. "The human has cursed him." But the soldier finally broke into a grin, wide and sharp, a smile none of them had ever seen on his face before. His voice, deep and rumbling, shook the silence. "This sound," he growled, "it feels like battle, like blood, like victory." Gasps filled the hall. Alien stepped back as if he had just sworn loyalty to the enemy. But the human only smirked, his eyes shining with pride. Without a word, he reached into his bag and pulled out another object, long wires and padded cups. He walked forward calmly, ignoring the commander's warning glare, and handed the strange item to the soldier. "Try these," the human said. The soldier's nostrils flared. He studied the device suspiciously, then slipped it over his head, covering his ears. The human tapped a small switch, and suddenly the storm returned. Louder, clearer, but only for him. The soldier froze. His pupils widened. His chest rose and fell faster. For the first time in his life, the sounds of war were not outside him, but inside him, controlled, sharpened. He could hear every strike of the drum like a hammer forging steel. He could hear the growl of the voice like a warrior shouting into his soul. His scars burned as if they remembered every fight, every victory, every wound. His body trembled, not in weakness, but in rising power. He let out a roar so loud it echoed through the chamber, his fist slamming down on the table with such force that the stone cracked. The other aliens stumbled back, eyes wide with terror. Some shouted, "He has lost his mind." Others whispered, "No, he has found something." The commander bared his teeth in anger. "Remove that device at once," he ordered, but the soldier did not obey. His roar continued, mixing with the music only he could hear, a terrifying harmony of alien strength and human chaos. The sound was gone for the rest of the hall, but they could all feel its power through him. His eyes glowed with wild energy. He was not the same soldier anymore. The human watched him with satisfaction. "You see," he said calmly, "it is not a curse. It is strength. It is life. He understands." The diplomats shouted in protest. "No, this is corruption. This is madness." But their voices shook with fear, and their words felt weak. The soldier ripped the device from his head, panting hard, his chest heaving. His grin was wider now, his voice shaking with fury and joy at once. "I want more," he growled. "Give me more." The hall broke into chaos. Some aliens demanded the human be arrested. Others begged for the music to be destroyed. But a few, only a few, could not hide the way their claws tapped against their seats, or the way their tails twitched in rhythm they could no longer hear. The commander shouted for silence, but his voice was drowned by whispers rising among the younger warriors. They had seen their strongest soldier awaken to something powerful, something uncontrollable, and now they wanted it too. The soldier stepped toward the human, his heavy boots shaking the floor. He looked down at him, towering like a beast ready to strike. For a tense moment, the diplomats thought he would crush the human where he stood. But instead, the scarred warrior bowed his head slightly, almost in respect. "Your sound," he said in a low growl, "is not weakness. It is a weapon, and I would wield it." The commander slammed his claws on the table. "Silence! You are blinded by trickery." But his voice shook. The truth was, even he had felt it, the pulse of power in his blood when the music roared. The difference was that he feared it. The soldier did not. And now, standing taller than ever, his scars glowing under the light, the warrior looked less like a servant of the council and more like a creature reborn. The human's smile did not fade. He looked around the hall, seeing the mix of horror, anger, and secret curiosity in every alien face. "This is only the beginning," he said. "You can cover your ears, you can call it madness, but you cannot stop it. You have heard it, and now it lives inside you." The scarred soldier let out one more roar, slamming his fist against his chest, the sound echoing like a war drum. The others flinched, their ears ringing from his voice alone. He stood proudly, a living echo of human heavy metal, while the hall quivered in fear. What had started as a strange human display had now turned into something far more dangerous. A spark of rebellion, a fire that could spread through an entire race. And no matter how hard the commanders and elders tried to control it, they all knew the truth. The first alien rebel had been born, and he would never be the same again. The chamber was heavy with silence, but it was not the calm silence they knew. It was the silence that follows a storm, where every breath carried the memory of thunder. The scarred soldier still stood tall, his chest rising and falling, his eyes glowing with the fire the music had awakened inside him. Around him, the other aliens shifted uneasily. Some looked at him with horror, others with envy. But none could ignore the way his body still trembled, as if the sound of the human's music had taken root inside him and refused to let go. The elders whispered together, their voices sharp with fear. "It is poison," one said. "It twists the mind." Another hissed, "We must forbid it before it spreads." Yet, even as they spoke, their eyes betrayed their unease. They could not explain how a mere sound had transformed their strongest soldier before their eyes. They could not explain the strange pull they too had felt, even if only for a moment. The commander's jaw tightened. He could not let this madness take hold, but the fear in his own heart betrayed him. In the corner of the hall, a young alien princess pressed her claws against her chest. Her scales shimmered faintly under the light, her breathing shallow. She had grown up surrounded by order, raised to keep her voice calm, her mind disciplined, her body graceful. Yet what she had just heard was nothing like the soft music of her people. It was chaos, wild and violent, yet there had been a strange pattern beneath it, a hidden order inside the storm. She could not stop her thoughts from circling around it. Her claws tapped unconsciously against the arm of her chair, following the ghost of the rhythm. When she noticed, she quickly pulled her hand back, her face flushing with shame. Not far from her, a small alien child clung to his mother's side, his wide eyes staring at the human. The sound had scared him, made him cry at first, but when it stopped, he found himself wishing it would return. He peeked from behind his mother's arm, his tiny claws drumming against her robes, copying the beat he remembered. His mother scolded him with a sharp whisper, but even she could not deny that the boy's heart was still racing faster than before, alive in a way it had never been. The human noticed everything. He saw the princess struggling to hide her tapping claws. He saw the child still swaying with leftover rhythm. He saw the soldier standing proud, burning with new energy. His smile deepened. "You feel it," he said softly, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the chamber. "You may fear it, but you cannot deny it. The sound has touched you. It is inside you now." The commander growled, his claws scraping the table. "Lies," he spat. "This is trickery. You twist their minds with noise." His voice was strong, but his eyes betrayed his unease. He remembered too clearly the way his own blood had raced against his will. He remembered the way his claws had trembled, the way the beat had forced his body to react. He wanted to deny it, but the truth clung to him like a shadow. The human shook his head. "No trickery," he said. "This is what we call freedom. We do not make music only to calm ourselves. We make it to fight, to rage, to live." His words hung in the air, striking deeper than the aliens wanted to admit. For them, art was always gentle, controlled, a tool to keep order. They had never imagined sound as a weapon or as a fire to unleash emotions they had buried long ago. The very idea unsettled them. If humans could turn chaos into art, what else were they capable of? One of the younger soldiers, standing near the wall, felt his claws twitch against the stone. He looked around nervously, hoping no one had noticed, but the pull inside him was too strong. The music had been pain, yes, but it had also been power. It made him feel alive in a way training drills never had. He clenched his fists to hide the shaking, but his tail betrayed him, lashing in rhythm with the memory of the drums. The elders tried to regain control. "Do not listen," one cried. "This human means to break our unity. Cover your ears if he dares to play it again. Resist the poison." But their words sounded weak, even to themselves. The princess lowered her eyes, but her heart was still pounding. The child hid his smile, still hearing the sound in his mind. Even the commander, strong and disciplined, could not shake the memory of the storm that had filled his blood with fire. The scarred soldier, still standing, finally spoke again. His voice was rough like gravel, but filled with certainty. "It is not poison," he growled. "It is strength. I have fought wars. I have spilled blood. I have carried the weight of battle on my back. But nothing has ever made me feel like that sound did." He placed his fist against his chest and looked at the human with fierce respect. "This chaos, I understand it, and I will not deny it." The hall erupted in shouts. Some called him mad. Some demanded he be removed from service. Others stared at him with secret longing, wondering what it had felt like to be consumed by that power. The human remained calm, his eyes steady, his voice sharp as he spoke once more. "You think it is madness because you fear what you cannot control, but it is not madness. It is who we are. When storms rage, we do not hide. We roar louder. When fear rises, we answer with fire. This is our way." The aliens shivered. If humans created such storms just for pleasure, what storms did they unleash in war? What kind of species could build art from destruction? The thought was terrifying, but also magnetic. The young could not look away. The elders could not find words strong enough to stop the spread of the fire. In that moment, every alien in the hall knew a dangerous truth. What they had heard was not just noise. It was a glimpse into the heart of humanity, and once heard, it could never be forgotten. The commander's patience finally broke. His claws dug into the stone table, leaving deep cracks as his voice thundered across the chamber. "Enough!" he roared. "If this human claims this storm is not a weapon but art, then let him prove it. Let us test this so-called music and see if it can stand against us." His words shook the silent aliens back into motion. The elders nodded in approval, thinking the commander would finally crush the human's strange influence. But the younger ones, their eyes still burning with leftover fire, looked on with a mix of fear and secret excitement. The human did not flinch. His lips curved into a small, calm smile, the kind of smile that carried no fear, only certainty. He looked at the commander and tilted his head slightly. "A test?" he asked. "Very well." Without waiting for permission, he reached into his bag and pulled out something larger than before. It was a speaker, black and heavy, its surface smooth and strange. He placed it gently on the center of the floor, as though setting down a sacred object. The aliens leaned back in their seats, their eyes wary, their claws twitching at the sight of this new human device. The commander narrowed his eyes. "What does it do?" The human's smile widened just slightly. "This," he said, "is live." His fingers tapped against the top of the device, and once again the air filled with sound. But this time, it was not the same track they had heard before. This time the music was louder, faster, more violent. The guitars tore through the chamber like blades of lightning, the drums pounded with the fury of marching armies, and the voices screamed like beasts set free from cages. The sound slammed into every wall, every bone, every heart. The soldiers in the hall staggered back, caught off guard by the sudden wave of noise. The commander snarled and shouted for them to stand firm. "Do not bend! Do not fall!" he ordered, his voice barely rising above the roar of the music. The soldiers gritted their teeth and planted their feet, their muscles trembling as they tried to resist. The elders covered their ears and hissed, their faces twisted in pain, but their pride would not let them flee. They stared at the human with hatred, even as their bodies betrayed them. The young aliens, however, could not hold still. Their blood boiled, their claws shook, and some began to move against their will. A soldier slammed his fist against his chest in rhythm with the drums, his roar mixing with the storm. Another stamped his feet against the floor, the echo joining the beat. The princess, trembling in her seat, felt her claws twitch again. She pressed them into her robes to stop the movement, but she could not stop the way her heart leapt with each pounding drum. Even the child, still clutching his mother, could not help but sway slightly, his eyes wide with wonder and terror at once. The commander saw it all and grew furious. He bellowed over the noise. "Resist! Fight it! Show the human his chaos has no power here!" His soldiers obeyed, but their bodies betrayed them. Their jaws clenched, their eyes burned, their hearts raced to the rhythm. Some shouted back at the sound, their voices raw with effort. They roared their war cries, thinking they could drown it out, but their cries were swallowed whole by the storm of guitars and drums. Their voices cracked, their throats bled, and still the music overpowered them. The human stood calmly in the center, nodding his head with each beat, his eyes filled with amusement. The scarred soldier, the first to embrace the music, did not resist at all. He stood proud, his body moving with the rhythm, his fists pounding against the table like war drums. His roar was not one of fear, but of joy, echoing through the chamber and making the walls shake. "Stronger!" he shouted. "Louder!" His voice carried through the storm, and the human grinned. With one twist of his fingers, the volume rose again. The sound became a hurricane. The elders screamed in terror now. Some collapsed against their chairs, clutching their heads as if the music would split their skulls. Others cursed the human, their voices lost in the chaos. But the youth could not help themselves. The rhythm burned in their blood, dragged them forward, forced them to respond. Some banged their claws against the walls. Others stomped their feet until the floor vibrated with them. It was no longer just sound. It was movement, energy, rebellion. The human saw it all and spoke above the storm. "This is not even our loudest band," he said. His words fell like fire into their ears. If this was not the limit, what else could humanity unleash? The commander staggered forward, forcing himself toward the device. His claws scraped the ground, his eyes blazing with fury. He would silence this madness with his own strength. He reached the speaker, raised his arm, and swung it down, but just as he did, a new scream tore from the device, faster, heavier, more violent than before. The sound hit him like a wall, slamming into his chest, stealing the air from his lungs. His arm froze mid-strike, his claws trembling above the machine. His body shook violently, his knees nearly buckling. For a moment, he thought he would fall before all his people. His pride alone kept him standing. The human tilted his head and watched. "You see," he said, "it is not weakness, it is strength, And no matter how you fight it, you cannot kill it. The sound is alive. The hall was chaos now. The elders cursed and begged for silence. The youth roared and moved with the rhythm. The soldiers shook, caught between loyalty to their commander and the fire in their blood. The scarred warrior raised his fist high and roared again, this time joined by others who could not hold back any longer. Their voices blended with the music, wild and powerful. The commander's eyes widened in horror. His own soldiers were giving in, and still the human stood calm, his smile sharp as a blade. He had not fired a weapon. He had not lifted a sword. Yet he had brought the strongest warriors in the galaxy to their knees with nothing but sound. And though the commander wanted to believe he had won by enduring, he knew the truth. Something had been unleashed that could never be chained again. The test was not just a trial of strength. It was the beginning of a dangerous change. The sound finally broke something inside the hall. The elders could scream for silence all they wanted, but their voices were nothing compared to the storm. The young aliens, those who had been raised under endless rules and cold discipline, were no longer still. Their bodies betrayed them. Their claws tapped, their tails lashed, their feet stamped against the floor in rhythm. They did not mean to do it, yet the music pulled them like chains, dragging their hearts into its fire. One young soldier, barely out of training, clenched his fists until his knuckles turned pale, but his head still moved to the beat. He tried to stop, but every drum strike forced his chest to rise and fall. Another young diplomat, usually calm and silent, let out a short growl that shocked even herself. She covered her mouth instantly, but the sound had already escaped, her heart racing with the echo. The scarred warrior who had first embraced the music stood proudly, his voice blending with the storm as he roared in rhythm. His strength made the others bolder, and one by one they began to surrender. The hall that had always been a place of order was no longer recognizable. It was alive, burning with noise and movement. The young shouted, stomped, and clashed their claws against the tables, creating their own wild rhythm alongside the music. Some of them laughed for the first time in their lives, a raw laugh filled with chaos and freedom. Others screamed, not in fear, but in release, as though they had been waiting their entire lives to break their silence. The elders shouted at them to stop, but their commands were powerless. The noise swallowed every order, every tradition. The princess trembled in her seat. She had tried to resist, tried to sit still, tried to keep her face composed like her teachers had taught her since birth. But her claws betrayed her again, tapping against the polished stone in rhythm. She pulled them back, ashamed. But her heart still beat to the drums. Her chest rose and fell with the rhythm, her body shaking with forbidden energy. She closed her eyes, and for a single moment, she let it happen. She tapped her claws again, this time without stopping herself. The sound was small, but to her, it was thunder. The child in the corner no longer hid. He clapped his tiny hands, laughing wildly. His mother tried to hush him, but her voice was drowned out. He clapped harder, faster, his laughter mixing with the storm. Other children joined, their voices high and sharp, filling the hall with new energy. The music was no longer only human, it had infected them all, spreading like fire through dry fields. The commander staggered at the center of the storm, his pride cracking. His orders meant nothing now. His voice had no power. He watched his people lose themselves, watched discipline turn to chaos, and he felt helpless. His heart raced against his will. His claws trembled. His chest still pounded in time with the drums, even though he hated it. He pressed his claws against the table to steady himself, but the rhythm refused to leave him. He feared it. He feared what it meant. The human stood in the center of the chaos, calm as ever. He looked around at the trembling, roaring, laughing aliens with eyes that glowed with triumph. His voice cut through the storm, clear and sharp. "You feel it," he said. "The freedom, the chaos, the strength. This is music. This is what it means to be alive." The scarred warrior raised his fist and slammed it against his chest. "Yes," he roared. "I feel it. I will not deny it." His voice carried through the hall, and several young soldiers joined him, pounding their chests in rhythm. Their roars shook the chamber, and for the first time the walls trembled not from the sound of the music, but from the voices of the aliens themselves. The elders collapsed into despair. They could not fight it anymore. Their shouts were drowned out, their authority crushed. They clung to each other, terrified of the power they had just witnessed. They had built their civilization on silence, on order, on control. And now, one human had broken that control with nothing but sound. They feared the future, feared what would happen when their youth demanded more of this chaos, when their soldiers fought not with calm precision, but with wild energy. The commander tried one last time to rise above it. He slammed his fist against the table, shouting until his throat burned. "Enough! This ends now!" But even his voice was weak against the storm. The young did not hear him. Or perhaps they chose not to listen. They were too busy roaring, too busy moving, too busy feeling alive. For the first time, they were free from the heavy chains of silence that had bound them since birth. And then suddenly, the music stopped. The human pressed the device, and the storm vanished. Silence returned, but it was not the same silence as before. This silence was filled with heavy breaths, pounding hearts, trembling claws. The aliens looked around at each other, their faces filled with shock at what they had done. They had shouted, they had moved, they had broken their own laws, and they had loved it. The human stood calmly, letting the silence stretch until it was unbearable. Then he spoke softly, but his words struck like thunder. "You cannot go back. You have felt it now. You know what freedom tastes like. You can silence the music, but you cannot silence your hearts." The hall was still, but every alien knew he was right. Some were ashamed, some were afraid, some were thrilled, but none could deny it. The sound had awakened something that would never sleep again. The scarred warrior stood taller than ever, his chest glowing with pride. The princess lowered her eyes, but her claws still twitched with rhythm. The child giggled, still clapping softly. Even the commander, proud and strong, knew in his heart that he could never truly escape the beat that still pounded inside him. The silence after the storm was worse than the storm itself because it carried the weight of change. The aliens had been shown something they could not unsee, something they could not unhear. And no matter how hard they tried to bury it, the seed had already been planted. Every alien in the chamber sat frozen, their breathing heavy, their bodies trembling with leftover fire. The silence was thick, heavier than stone, because every mind in that room carried the memory of the storm. They could still hear the thunder of drums in their veins, still feel the sharp claws of guitars scratching their thoughts, still taste the wildness that had broken their control. They tried to return to their discipline, to their silence, but their hearts betrayed them. The rhythm was still alive inside. The elders gathered their strength first. One of them rose, her scales shimmering with age, her voice cold and sharp. "This must be forbidden," she said. "It is too dangerous. It corrupts, it destroys. No species should carry such chaos." Others nodded quickly, clinging to her words as if they were a shield. They wanted order to return. They wanted to bury what had just happened. But their voices shook with fear, and their eyes darted nervously toward the younger ones, who sat still, but whose claws still twitched, whose tails still tapped softly against the floor. The human envoy stood calmly in the center, his arms folded, his face relaxed. He had not moved during their shouting, and when he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost gentle. "Why do you fear it?" he asked. His words silenced the hall again. "You have weapons, you have armies, you have power. Yet one sound makes you tremble. Do you not see? You are not afraid of the music. You are afraid of yourselves." His eyes swept across them, and several aliens lowered their heads, unable to meet his gaze. The scarred warrior, the first to embrace the music, rose to his feet. His armor glinted in the light, his scars glowing like marks of fire. He clenched his fists and spoke with a voice that rolled like thunder. "He is right. It is not poison. It is life. It is fire. I have never felt so alive as I did in that storm." He looked around the chamber, his eyes daring the others to deny it. "You felt it too. Do not lie." His words struck deep. Some elders hissed angrily, but none of them could say he was wrong. They had felt it, every one of them. The princess lowered her head, her claws trembling in her lap. Her heart was still racing, her thoughts still circling around the memory of the rhythm. She wanted to speak, to admit that it had shaken her soul, but her voice failed her. Still, the human noticed her silence and the fire hiding in her eyes. He knew the seed was already planted. The commander rose at last, his pride forcing him to stand tall, though his body still shook. His voice was deep, filled with anger and fear. If humans can create such madness just for pleasure, what will they unleash in war? If they can turn chaos into art, what will they turn into weapons? His words carried weight, and for a moment, many nodded in agreement. But the commander's question was also an admission of fear. He feared what humanity truly was. The human envoy's eyes hardened. He stepped forward, his voice clear. You ask what we unleash in war? We unleash ourselves. We are the storm. We are the roar that rises against silence, the fire that answers fear. You think this sound is madness, but it is who we are. We fight storms with louder storms. We face death with laughter and song. This is our strength. His words cut through them like a blade, and none dared to interrupt. The hall was divided now. Elders glared with hatred, desperate to cling to the old ways. But the youth, the soldiers, even some diplomats could not forget what they had felt. They stared at the human with wide eyes, filled with fear and curiosity, but also respect. For the first time, they saw humanity not as weak creatures, but as something far more dangerous, something they could not fully understand. The scarred warrior stepped closer to the human, his massive frame towering above him. For a moment, the elders thought he would crush him, but instead he lowered his head in respect. You have given me a gift, he said, a fire I did not know I carried. From this day forward, I will carry it into every battle. His voice rumbled with certainty, and his words spread like sparks among the younger soldiers. Whispers filled the chamber, whispers of rebellion, of curiosity, of hunger for more. The commander slammed his claws against the table. Enough. This ends here. We will never allow such corruption to spread. His roar silenced the whispers, but only for a moment. Even he knew his control was slipping. He looked at his people, at their restless movements, at their burning eyes, and his heart sank. He had lost them. Not all, not yet, but enough. The human had planted something he could not uproot. The human pressed the device once more. A short burst of sound filled the air, a scream of guitars, a crash of drums, a roar of voices, and then silence again. Every alien jumped, their bodies tense, their hearts pounding. The human smiled faintly. You see, you cannot resist it. You cannot forget it. You will try to bury it, but it will live inside you forever. He picked up the device and held it close. This is not just sound. This is humanity, and now it is part of you. The hall stayed silent after he left, but the silence was broken from within. Across the ship, whispers spread quickly. Soldiers spoke of the storm they had felt. Young aliens tapped their claws against the walls, imitating the rhythm. Children giggled as they clapped in secret. Even the commander, alone in his chamber, could not escape. His claws trembled against the table, and though he cursed himself, he heard the drums again in his chest. Against his will, his head moved slightly in rhythm. He growled in shame, but he could not stop. A legend had been born that day. The aliens would remember the sound of heavy metal not as music, but as a force, a storm unleashed by fragile-looking humans who proved to be anything but weak. And though the elders fought to ban it, though the commander tried to bury it, the seed of rebellion had already been sown. The aliens had felt something they could never unfeel. And in time, the storm of human music would rise again, not as a performance, but as a weapon that no enemy could truly withstand.